from flipping pancakes to flipping houses. If you live in the Chicagoland area, you've probably had one of his pancakes. It's the one and only George Blueberry from Blueberry Hill. A lot of people have had his pancakes, but what they don't know, that George is a Greek immigrant, and he started out with nothing and built a successful brand of pancake houses. Not only that, but today he is investing and buying and flipping real estate. And what I wanted to sit down and talk to him was, how did that journey start and why he decided to not only own restaurants, but start doing residential properties. This is going to be a fun interview. So let's go. Hey guys, this is Andrew from Chicago RIA, and we have our good friend, Mr. George Nikopolous in the studio. And if you don't know the man, a lot of times you've probably had pancakes at one of his outlets, and we refer to him as Blueberry George, right? That's our kind of friend name for George. So George, number one, man, welcome. Right?
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Andrew.
This has been something that I thought would be exciting because a lot of times, right, people patronize your restaurants and they're like, man, I wonder, I'd love to own a place that makes pancakes. I mean, what could be better, right? You've got a bunch of locations, but I guess take me back. Before we get into real estate, what I want to know, obviously, from pancakes, flipping pancakes to flipping houses, but okay, where does this whole journey start?
The whole journey starts years ago when my family came in. My mother and father came as immigrants to the States. They came right after World War II. A lot of people were coming to the United States. My mother came. She worked first at the Solo Cup Company in Chicago. After that, went back to Greece, brought my dad. They came here back in the early 60s. I was born somewhere in the 60s over there. And 1970, they opened up their first restaurant. You know, had some success, had some failures. Father passed away at 16, so you know, I had to put my big boy pants on and become one of the breadwinners of the family.
So hold on, before you move, right? And because this is what, like a lot of times today we go into an operation like yours, right? It's packed on a Sunday, you're like, man, this guy must be making a lot of money, right? But a lot of times these are mom and pop businesses that were started. A lot of Greek immigrants went into the restaurant business, different types of businesses. At that time, right, like a typical immigrant, you guys didn't come from money. Right?
No, there was no money there.
I mean, if your mom is working a solo company, this is not like, I mean, This is just as humble beginnings as it gets, right? What was the inspiration at that time for your parents? What was the family background like that caused them to say, okay, well, we're going to open a restaurant?
The family inspiration was a lot of the Greeks were in the food business. They had food carts back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, and it just eventually moved into the restaurants, into brick and mortar. So it was a familiar business for a lot of the Greeks, and a lot of the Greeks would bring their uncles, their cousins, their nephews over to this country, and they started to work in the restaurants. And instead of working for other people, they worked for themselves.
And, you know, it's a key point I want to bring up because a lot of times you see this with immigrants, right? Mm-hmm. Immigrant populations, depending on what era they moved to this country, right? Everybody came here looking for an opportunity. And a lot of the immigrants, in fact, more of the immigrants came here and they were not necessarily highly educated people, right? These were just, they didn't have a lot going on back home. And they're like, we're going to move to America where there's land of opportunity. Really, I mean, that's kind of where it all starts,
It all
right?
started, correct.
The restaurant at that time, I mean, obviously, clearly it didn't look like what your restaurants look today, right? Where was it, at the first restaurant?
My father had bought a restaurant, went in partners with my godfather in the early 70s. So that's kind of where I grew up. Didn't have a babysitter. We stayed in the restaurant. We kind of watched TV in a small room. We helped out as much as we could as the years went on. A couple of years later, my father sold a restaurant, got into another partnership. That failed. I kind of got turned off by being in the restaurant business. So I started looking at different avenues of getting into the car business or getting into IT, computers. Went through some schooling, some trade school, mechanic school. And then I ended up back in the restaurant business because I felt comfortable with it. Through all those years, I was cooking in the kitchen, short order cook, flipping burgers, flipping pancakes, you know, doing that normal stuff. And I got an opportunity from one of my mentors. He said to me, hey, George, why don't you open up a restaurant? I'm like, I don't know anything about restaurants besides being a short order cook. He says, well, I'm going to help you out. So we kind of went into partnerships, even though he was a silent partner. He kind of helped me along. And as I learned the business, as the months went by and the years went by, I got more and more comfortable. I did fail. The first restaurant I did close. I almost filed bankruptcy. I was in debt over $100,000. So I went to my mentors and I asked, what do you think? And they're like, that's okay, you're still young. We know people in the business for 20, 25 years, and it's okay if you fail. Well, I think that was the point where it put a fire under my, whatever you want to call it. And I said, well, I'm not going to fail.
So at that point, right, I know you tried your hand into the car business a little bit, right? So you kind of tried a bunch of things, not necessarily that they all worked out,
right.
But after trial and error, in the form that Blueberry is today, right? What we see, you have a bunch of locations, obviously. When did that really kind of get settled in? When you're like, man, I think this is working. What time frame was it?
Well, a funny story is when the restaurant went belly up and I closed it down, I went to my mentors and I went to my mother and I said, hey, what do you think if I do a pancake place? And they both looked at me and they said, you're not going to make it. And this was kind of the resurgent of the waffle houses, pancake houses that were starting to happen in the Chicagoland area. So I was kind of on the cusp there and I said, well, I'm not making any money with the people that I have. Let me try something different. So in '94, I opened up the doors in September, October as Blueberry Hill. So after that, I started to scale up and I saw the business was doing well. And I opened up another one in '97, '99, 2001, 2003, and here's what you see today. Almost 25 years later, we're at right now. So
today it's an obvious success, right? But let's talk about the industry as a whole. Restaurant industry. Everybody is fascinated by a cool restaurant, a cool bar, right? But the statistical failure in that business is higher than probably any other business that I know of.
correct.
Right? It's a tough business to be in. How has that changed?
Well, just little statistics. Restaurants in the first year, 85% of them closed down. In the second year, it's over 70%. So restaurant business has changed. Costs have gone up, employment costs have gone up, taxes have gone up. So everybody wants to open up a restaurant. You see the famous stars, the coaches, Ditka, the Maddens, a lot of the basketball. It sounds sexy, but it's hard work. And you know what, for the money that you're putting in, the hard work you're putting in, you know, we have a saying, the Greeks have a saying, half a day is 12 hours. So in the Greek 40-hour week, there's no such thing, it's called 80 hours. That's a half a day. So if you put that into perspective, that's a lot of work.
I'm stealing that line, by the way. Okay. Half a day is 12 hours.
Half a day is 12 hours.
I'm going to put my name to it before
it's on camera now. He can't take it. It's trademarked. Okay.
So no, but I mean, but yet if you look at any entrepreneur, right? That's the story. Right? It doesn't matter how big a business it is. It was somebody's dream, and for 99.99% of us, right? It's a very, very, very humble beginning. And sometimes you look back and you're like, man, I can't believe that I really made it, right? Because it's tough. So what brought you, right? You started coming to Chicago RIA. You're a successful entrepreneur in your own right. I had eaten a bunch of times, a bunch of pancakes, would go for a hike, end up at your place. You know, but I didn't know you. Until you actually joined Mastery, I had no idea that you owned the Blueberry Hill. What got you here? I mean, what was that process in your mind? What was going on?
The process in my mind was looking at the atmosphere of the restaurant business. I could open up more restaurants, but in the end, what we're doing here is building wealth. And with the restaurants, unfortunately, you can't build wealth unless you save money. And it was getting harder to save money and harder to make money as the government gets involved, as businesses expand, as the different restaurants open up, competition becomes immense, fierce. We know in Oak Brook how many establishments. There's over 500 establishments of food in the city of Oak Brook alone. That's a fact. So that's competitive. And you have to rely on a lot of people. If you think about it, to get that plate of food to your table, there's 50 people behind, from the guy that grows the food, to the guy that picks the food, to the guy that delivers it, to the guy that cooks it, to the person who washes the dishes. to the hostess that picks up your money. So there's a lot of people involved to get that plate of food. So I said, well, there's got to be an easier way, and there's got to be a way for retirement that I can build my wealth. And that's kind of how I came here, and I talked to a few people, and they said, you know, we got this 3-day going on, see what he has to say and go from there. And obviously, as a Greek, we're a little skeptical. We think we know everything, okay? Well,
I mean, skeptical would be, I mean, you guys are pretty fierce in terms of belief systems.
Correct.
Right? Pretty
Yeah.
fierce. And mind you have the right to be, because when you have succeeded, you've gotten punched a lot, right, over the years. So you become a bit skeptical, a bit cynical, right, about
Correct.
everything, right? Because you don't know who to believe, because you're like, hey, at least my way works.
Works,
right?
correct.
So what are the margins in your business, right? And you happen to be in the breakfast business. That happens to be like there's a bar business, there's the dinner crowd, there's some restaurants specialized for lunches. You guys, the main part of your, I guess, business is breakfast,
Breakfast, correct.
Right? So, and that's considered to be a higher margin business.
Correct.
Right? Because generally, if you do the math, pancake flour or eggs generally doesn't cost as much.
Correct.
So you should be able to make bigger margins. Have you seen that change even on your side of things?
the margins have decreased over the years because the costs have increased.
What do we talk about numbers-wise, in general?
In general, I would say at one time many years ago, you used to be in the high teens. Now you're lucky if you're in the high single digits.
For return?
For returns right now.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
I mean, most of the restaurants that are out there, the big corporations, they're doing it all by volume. They're looking at what the volume is. Their percentages are even less than that. They're in the middle single digits, but they're doing the volumes of $10 million, $20 million, and that's how they're making their money.
You know, so I have to tell you something. This is a few years back. This is sometime around 2012 or 13, maybe, yeah, sometime around that time. I was doing a lot of flips. Right? Before I started doing flips, I looked at a bunch of restaurants. At that time, I didn't have a lot of money. I make some money doing flips, and then again, I revisit. Me, Rahul, we had a bunch of partners who were investing in real estate, buying rentals, buying flips. And we looked at Tilted Kilt. We looked at a lot of the franchises. We looked at every business that was out there, including bars that we could buy, where we're like, man, all we're looking for is 20, 25% returns, right? In our mind, we thought that this is great. We put 100,000 in. For every 100,000, I make 25% return. I'm happy, right? And literally the numbers that I saw started watching. Owner-operated businesses, mind you. A bar, a perfect example. There was one of the bigger brands that are kind of in the area. We know some of these brands. And I went there. I'm like, this is sexy. This is kind of cool, man. I'm gonna walk in. You know, this is
We're
gonna
gonna have
be
our own restaurant.
exactly.
We got our own table. We got our own servers.
Yeah, exactly. We're like, I mean, you know, and I walk in and I meet this guy, and he's supposed to be the example. The franchisor sent me there because they're like, oh, this guy operates it the way it's operated. And we talk about it, he's doing $1.6 million in volume, right? And in the middle of the afternoon, when it's supposed to be 3 o'clock, when it's supposed to be dead time, I mean, he looks worn out. Like he's completely worn out. And we sit down, he's like, thank you, he's like, I appreciate you coming. I'm like, we're told you're the model of how this is supposed to be done. And he's like, yeah, but I'm like, what kind of money do you take home? Owner operated.
Correct.
On $1.6 million. He's like, man, I run it exactly the way it's supposed to be run. Owner operated for $1.6 million for $1.2 million investment. He was taking about 140 home at that time. And I'm going like, for me working there, this is ridiculous at best.
For the hours that you put in and the stress you got to deal with and all the problems you have, it's just not worth it anymore.
So let's talk about, was that one of the factors that drove you into looking at real estate?
It was one of the factors.
Okay. So now I want to kind of delve into it further, because a lot of people, especially a lot of the Greek immigrants, right? They got into shopping centers, they got into apartment buildings, they got into big multi-units. Why didn't you start there? Because you're buying small single-family properties. If some people, they're going to watch this video and they're going to laugh. Oh my God, George has all these small properties. Why? There's a method to this madness, but I want to understand the reasoning behind it.
The reasoning behind this is building the wealth, is looking at it from 5, 7 years, 10 years from now, when you have a portfolio of $5, $6, $10 million. You can't do it in the restaurant business. It's too difficult. I'd have to build and franchise and develop. It's just too much work for the amount of money. Now the returns in the investments that we're getting 20, 30, 40, 50%, 100%, and putting very little money in your pocket. Right there, when you just said to me, putting zero money out of your pocket or getting investments of 20, 30, 40, 50%, 100% on your return, where are you guys going to get that? Not in the restaurant business.
Let's talk about some of the commercial buildings. You've owned some commercial buildings.
I have some commercial
right?
buildings, yeah.
You have some commercial buildings, and a lot of times it's sexy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Man, I got this commercial building, want to have these commercial clients over there, and then all I'm going to do is collect rent. And the conversation goes something like this. Andrew, I have this friend. Everybody has a friend, right? That they don't know, they just know a friend who has a friend. Right? Man, he just put up a building. Starbucks runs for there. Every month they get a check for $15,000-$20,000. Now, and I know that that's called chasing a rainbow.
Correct.
Right? That rarely do people, happens that way, where even if you have a Starbucks or you have a CVS or you have a Walgreens, just understand, you're going to buy a corner, you're going to put a building on it, they're going to sign a long-term lease. This is Class A tenants, right? They're big multinational franchises. What do you think the corner is going to cost you? What do you think is the development cost? What do you think is the taxes on that piece of property? And then how realistically do you think it is that an average individual, normal human being, can pull that off?
First of all, on the commercial side, the return of the investment is much smaller than even in the restaurant business, and the outlay of money that you have to put. Andrew talked about A-class tenants. I had Starbucks, Five Guys, Schlotzsky's Deli, AT&T. All those were A tenants. Those returns were not there, guys, okay? If anything, the small houses that I've been buying and what Andrew preaches on flips works. It just works, period, end of discussion. There is no...
So hold on, I want to explain these numbers, right?
Yeah.
That in those bigger shopping centers, not that they're sexy, right? They're sexy. You know Tom Saganos?
No.
You don't know Tom. So Tom Saganos built the Starbucks in Schaumburg,
Okay.
right? And we laugh about it all the time, right? He's a day trader. He trades currency, and we talk about it, and we laugh about it all the time. He's like, man, it took me 3 years to build it. It's sexy as hell,
Right.
right? He made some money, but he has 19 properties that are all paid off, right? 19 properties. And he did those properties in a matter of 3 years, no loan on the properties, right? I'm like, which do you think makes more? Your Starbucks, where the Starbucks was, and he has another car wash that he owns, or the 19 properties. He's like, let's not talk about it, right? He's like, well, yeah, these are sexier. But I'm like, which makes more money? This one.
Sure.
And every single time. Because here, you make 6, 8%, 9%. I mean, you're killing it, right? You're making phenomenal returns because the cap rates on a lot of these, they're super low because you have super stable
Correct.
tenants,
Yeah.
right? And your competition is super high. So when you're buying properties today, what type of properties are you looking at?
Myself, I'm looking at single-family properties. I'm looking at a very simple box. The nicer the box, the squarer the box, the happier I am.
Okay, so let's
Yeah.
describe that. So basically, a B suburb, which is a bread and butter suburb, a square footage of a property anywhere from 850 to about 1,200, 1,300 square feet.
Correct.
Right? 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath, ranch style type of a house, split level, right? That's basically what you like.
That's what I'm loving.
That's what you're loving. Okay. Because that is a very non-exciting way of investing, right? And most people, they would, number one, would be, oh my God, man, if I was George, right, I would buy bigger the better. But bigger is not necessarily more lucrative, right? So in terms of what is your goal? So you started this process how long ago?
About 7 months ago.
7 months ago, right? And in 7 months, how many properties have you bought?
Oh, we're 11 properties, 12 properties, and a couple of multi-units.
Okay, 11, 12 properties. So the reason I wanted George to come here and why I respect somebody like him is not because he's successful in his own right? You did not need me. I'm 100% sure. You would have done still okay because that's the kind of guy you are.
Correct.
Right? Why would somebody like you come and go, okay, I'm going to come and listen to this dude? What is that mentality, that hunger to grow, that hunger to say, okay, I'm going to be humble and I'm going to go, okay, let me absorb the thought? Because a lot of people will not do that. Why do you think the way you do?
I think that was the hardest, was to absorb that information over there and really put it to use.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you basically at some point decided, okay, I'm going to put my own ego aside?
Correct.
Okay. Because even for me, a lot of times, it's tough, man. It's tough to go in, and every time that I force myself to do it, I'm like, well, maybe I don't agree with the guy, but every time I learn something, right? Every single time I learn something, and it's kind of an interesting process for me to watch. We see this happen in mastery all the time. People will come, the more intelligent they are, once they realize you know what you're talking about, they're willing to put their own, what they know aside, and they grow at a rate like no tomorrow, right? So you've bought properties that are single-family properties, and you said 11 houses?
11 houses. Yeah.
11 houses in 6 months?
Correct.
Okay. How many more do you have under contract?
I have 1, 2, 3. 3 should be closing this month.
3 should be closing.
Yeah.
So in a year, what's the goal for you?
My original goal was to get up to 10 houses. In 1 year.
In 1 year?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
and you're going to end up being?
Only God knows.
Only God knows. Okay.
Yeah,
But for you, 25 properties, year 1 is doable?
It's doable.
It's very, very
definitely.
doable. Okay.
Definitely.
So now, on 20 to 25 properties, right? Across the board, out-of-pocket money, how much, or let's just say this. Right now you said 11 properties?
11 properties.
11 properties. How much money out of pocket are you going to have invested after the refis are done?
After refis are done, there'll be maybe $10,000 in each property.
$10,000 in each property, okay? So 11 properties, about $110,000 invested. What would be the rate of return across the board on all of these?
Right now, the rate of return, if I calculate it right, is going to be somewhere in over 40% return on my money.
40% cash on cash?
Cash on cash.
Cash on cash
Net.
return?
Yeah.
Net. This is after everything numbers.
Right.
Okay? And then in terms of equity, how much equity would these properties have?
These properties will have 30 to 40% equity.
30 to 40% equity across the board?
Across the board.
Okay.
Right.
I don't know about you, man, right? But if somebody really pauses this, goes back and listens to those numbers, think about it, guys. 110,000 invested, 11 houses, and you're making 40% return. You realize that's on 110,000 invested, you're making about $45,000 for the year, and this is in 6 months. See, the reason why small properties work is not because there is a secret. The reason is there is a plenty of them, right? Someone like George, he could go out and buy bigger properties. Not that it doesn't make sense. Tomorrow, a big apartment building, right? Like a 10 unit that your friend Marta bought, that comes up. You're not letting go of it.
Absolutely
right?
not.
Because it's a great property. It's not the size of the property that's important. What is important is, does it make sense? Can you build wealth with it, right? Because literally what took you all these years to build, to get to a certain place in your life, if you really get on it for the next 5, 6 years, all that many years, you can match out within the next 5 to 6 years.
In a short period of time.
In a short period of time.
Very short period of time.
So what do you say to that person that looks at someone like you and looks at, man, George is successful. That's why this works for him. What do you say to that person?
I would say to that person one thing. There's a KISS method out there. Keep it simple, stupid. Okay? You got to go with it. Just keep it simple. Okay? Work hard, persevere, okay? And be open to people who have done it, to mentors, to Andrew Rahil, who have done this, who can show you the proof, 200, 300, 400 properties, other students that you have next to you that you can use their knowledge and appreciate them as well. Don't just use their knowledge and throw them out. You're going to be able to build on it. I built these restaurants by basically build, what do we call it? Build, rinse, repeat? How does that go?
We call it,
Yeah.
we call it, right, buy, rehab, rent,
Right.
refinance, and repeat,
Or
right?
cookie cutter. I took the original restaurant, I duplicated it in a different location, in another location, another, and that's what we're doing now. Marionette Park, Oak Lawn, Lansing, Where else?
But,
Cal
well,
City, wherever we're buying now.
Midlothian, any of these
Midlothian,
suburbs,
any of them,
right?
yeah.
So you've kind of kept it very, very simple,
Correct.
right? So what's the goal? What does that? You have a daughter.
I have a daughter
Right.
that's young,
Okay,
10 years old.
So what does that look like for you?
Well, that looks like the money that I need to retire and the money that I need for her education to put her through school, because by that time, you know how much education costs today. How much will it cost in 10 years? So these houses, some of them will be paid off. I'll be able to sell a house, refinance the house, get the money. And the beauty about this all, it's not coming out of my pocket. It's coming out of your tenant's pocket. So if they're paying the taxes, they're paying the principal, and you're getting a net, who's actually paying for your college education, your Mercedes-Benz, your trip to Hawaii? It's not you guys. I've got to work, I got to flip pancakes, and then I got to take the money out of my piggy bank to go on vacation. But what about the beauty, the American dream? Let somebody else pay for your vacation, your education.
So this is a good point. Hold on, right? So I want to you like cars.
I love cars.
You love
old
cars.
ones, new ones, I love them all.
Right? You love cars. And at a time, you at least have
Half a dozen.
half a dozen cars, right? So you're a lot of people can
on
relate
the small
to that.
side.
On
no,
the small side.
on the big side, about a dozen. But
Right.
you know.
Okay. So and you try them all, right? American muscle cars to everything, Italian to German. You're not prejudiced, right?
No.
And you change them, and you're living the American dream, man.
I'm trying
But
to,
here's
yeah.
the deal: that in all honesty and kidding aside, all the cars you're buying, all the fun things that you try to do, enjoy
Mm-hmm.
with you, your daughter, whatever, right? It literally, I mean, and in your case, no joke, right? You have to crack a lot of eggs, and you have to make a lot of pancakes, and you hope the crowd shows up, and you hope that they like it and that they continue to
Correct.
like it. I mean, it's just the business, right? But yet, with enough rental properties, your tenants are going to work to their respective jobs. They need a place to stay.
Correct.
It doesn't matter if George is back over there flipping pancakes, and if for the next 10, 20 years, if he can keep making recipes that you and I are satisfied with.
Correct.
Because that is a tough demand to satisfy.
Correct.
Right? So, number one, from my end, bottom of my heart, thank you
Thank
for
you,
coming
Rich.
in, because it's always an honor whenever people who are entrepreneurs in their own right? Come, listen, learn, and one great part about you is not only that you have listened and learned and taken it to another level, but you're helping a lot of other people.
Correct.
Right? Friends, people who you've made new friends with. So I am truly humbled, and I
Thank
think
you.
a lot of people will enjoy the interview. So thanks a bunch,
Thank you.
bud.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.